Hey guys, welcome back. And this is TJ with Dead History. And today, of course, is part 2 of our look at the 19th President of the United States, Rutherford B. Hayes. Obviously, this is the next installment of our presidential series. And I am flying solo this week, so I am going to jump right into it here and start discussing the presidency of Rutherford B. Hayes. So, in 1876, the future seemed bright, with things like Alexander Graham Bell's telephone being introduced at the World's Fair in Philadelphia. Things seemed to be kind of on the up and up and looking bright for the future. But, however, the present state of America at the time was not so bright. Though all of the southern states were back in the Union, Reconstruction had not formally ended, and the country was mired in a deep economic depression. The truth of the matter is that the severe financial crisis in 1873, the country was only just beginning to recover from. So it largely was because the government itself was a small institution relative to captains of industry, particularly in the heavy industries, such as like steel and railroads. As smaller industrial companies failed, rich businessmen like Andrew Carnegie, right here on your screen, and John D. Rockefeller, right here on your screen, bought them out at fire sale prices. The haves were buying out the have-nots, and they were becoming even bigger than before. These titans of industry were shoring up their power by taking advantage of the weak economy and preparing to assume leadership where the president wouldn't. Really, we were becoming so industrialized throughout the country that these guys like Carnegie and Rockefeller, they were the giants. They were the guys really like practically running things, especially with all the money they had. So it's quite interesting, actually. The Gilded Age, as people call it, seemed to be this age of conspicuous consumption. That kind of leads us right up to the election of 1876. Now, the election of 1876 is so crazy. I'll explain it to you guys. As I'm explaining the election of 1876, I'm going to show pictures, of course, from election results, probably some newspaper cartoons and that sort of thing from back then on the screen, as I always do. But I'm also going to show you photos of a gravesite, and that gravesite is of Samuel J. Tilden, who was Rutherford B. Hayes' opponent in the election of 1876. I visited Tilden's grave, which is in New York, and when you see those pop up on the screen while I'm talking, I will also pop up the exact name of the cemetery and everything it's located at. So that's what those will be when you do see them, because you're probably going to be like, why is there a grave site up on the screen? That's why. It's Samuel J. Tilden. So the election of 1876 would prove telling as the open wound of Reconstruction. It showed just how weak the presidency was becoming. It really did. The election of 1876, it goes down as one of the most controversial in American history. Rutherford B. Hayes is a compromise candidate. He is seen as very unacceptable, but a reliable Republican. And he is running against a man named Samuel J. Tilden of New York. On election night, Tilden wins the popular vote. And Tilden is way ahead in the electoral vote. He's actually so far ahead that the count is 184 to 165 in favor of Tilden. Okay? But there are 3 southern states that are being contested, and those states are going to decide who is going to become the next president. And for the first time since 1824, when John Quincy Adams defeated Andrew Jackson, the election would hinge on the electoral count, not the popular one. And in the shadow of civil war, the result would prove especially precarious. The Democratic Party had seized control in all but 3 southern states, Those states were Louisiana, South Carolina, and Florida. And in those 3 states, the election results were being disputed. Were black votes really counted fairly? Was there election fraud? How many votes should come from each of these states? So Congress has to figure out, what do you do? What do we do here? With the Electoral College results being challenged, Congress creates an Electoral Commission. The commission awards all 3 contested states to Rutherford B. Hayes. So now, Hayes is elected president by 1 electoral vote. Literally 1. If John Tyler was known as his Accidency, as Tyler was known as, then Rutherford B. Hayes was known as his Fraudulency. It was really a very, very debated, disputed, contested, controversial election. Just to read you another little thing. Hayes won the election, and it was the tightest and most hostile in history. Hayes became the 19th president of the United States in 1877, but that's the easy part. After the Civil War, Hayes served in Congress for 2 years before returning home to become a 3-term governor of Ohio from 1867 to 1876. In 1876, he ran for president against New York Governor Samuel Tilden, and the Democrat Tilden appeared to have locked up the White House as the early returns rolled in. Hayes went to bed on election night convinced he would soon be making a concession speech, though he had predicted if he lost, it would be by crime, by bribery, and repeating in the North, and by violence and intimidation in the South. But Hayes awoke the next day to learn that he had won the Pacific Slope and would need to claim the southern states of South Carolina, Florida, and Louisiana in order to ensure the 185 electoral votes needed at the time to win. So, very crazy. The election boards in those 3 states, citing intimidation of black voters, voided Democratic votes and declared Hayes the winner, which appeared to swing the election to Hayes. However, Hayes then lost Oregon when it emerged that one of the state's Republican electors held a government job and could not cast his vote for Hayes, and the Democratic governor certified a new Democratic elector. The disputed states cast conflicting votes, and that's when things really got messy. Senate leadership was inundated with requests from Republicans to decide which votes to count, while Democrats wanted a joint session of Congress to determine the winner. The 2 sides forged a compromise when the Electoral Commission Act was passed in January of 1877. The act established a commission of 5 senators, 5 congressmen, and 5 Supreme Court justices who would decide what votes to count, a decision that would in turn ultimately decide the election. The commission was meant to consist of 7 Republicans, 7 Democrats, and 1 independent, Justice David Davis. But before the commission could make their decision, the Illinois legislature attempted to buy Davis's support by appointing him senator. Davis instead resigned from the commission, and a new justice, Republican Joseph Bradley, was appointed instead. So, this new commission consisted of 8 Republicans and 7 Democrats, who voted along party lines in a series of votes in February to award Hayes the disputed states. But the Democrat-controlled House filibustered the results until March 2nd, when Hayes was finally awarded the disputed states just days before the inauguration. These votes gave Hayes a 185 to 184 advantage in the Electoral College and the presidency. Hayes was elected with about 250,000 fewer popular votes than Tilden, and was sneeringly referred to as Rutherford and his fraudulency by angry Democrats. And the interesting thing about the election of 1876 is not only the stuff that I just read to you, But as you heard, Hayes did not know he was even going to be president up until a few days before the inauguration. So both Hayes and Tilden both were under the assumption that they won. So they both were ready to be inaugurated. It was really very unbelievable and crazy. The dispute was resolved by an informal deal known as the Compromise of 1877, a bargain that would effectively end Reconstruction. Republicans agreed to remove the last federal troops in the South, which were keeping their party in power in the same 3 states where their votes were disputed. The compromise allows the Republican Party to abandon what had been its signature issue, the Reconstruction of the South. But they had been taking political hits for this. So in some ways, not all Republicans are unhappy with the compromise. You know, one reason why we kind of have a number of very unassertive, drifting presidents is because of the memory of Andrew Johnson. Grant's administration is a saturnel, it's just got all this corruption, a carnival of debauchery, if you will. One person put it. It gives an idea of the caliber of men that you have in office. And the result is, for many people at least, that presidents are best when they stay nice and quiet and they don't involve themselves in things. They just keep out of things and stay quiet. So, I mean, inevitably, though, after all this, the crazy election, the results, the compromise, at 54 years old, Rutherford B. Hayes was sworn in as the 19th President of the United States in a private ceremony held in the White House. It was really a low-key kickoff to a series of inept presidents. Just the truth. You know, what is truly remarkable about Hayes' 4 years in office is how little there is to say about Hayes' 4 years in office. There's not a lot to say. He only did one term. You know, we'll get to that. That's what he stated. He would only do one term. He just didn't do much. As Hayes was introducing the traditional Easter egg roll at the White House, the men who had already been shoring up their power economically, the captains of industry, that is, they started to dictate the course for the country. By 1878, Andrew Carnegie had started a steel empire that would eventually be worth $400 million. John D. Rockefeller controlled a third of the nation's oil business. Historically, their amount of wealth would make them the richest men in the world, and believe it or not, the richest men of all time. Yes, richer than Bill Gates, richer than Warren Buffett. The richest men in the history of the world. Andrew Carnegie and John D. Rockefeller. No doubt. It is also a time when many more Americans are becoming much more dissatisfied with the promise of their country because they are not realizing it. So in 1877, there was a series of crippling railroad strikes that really brought commerce to a halt and created massive social unrest. Big business cut deals with desperate railroads for low shipping rates, further increasing their power while putting the pinch on the working man. A few months after Hayes' inauguration, the Penn Railroad Company cut workers' pay by over 20%. Yeah, crazy. The trainmen called a general strike, and Rutherford B. Hayes' response set a precedent. For the first time, a president sent in federal troops to break a strike. The use of federal troops to restore order was highly controversial. But Hayes defended this on the grounds that it really was a choice, I should say, of the breakdown of social order for a brief period or the restoration of it. So he felt like, this is the right call. On all the big social issues of the 19th century, whether it's workers fighting for better conditions, whether it's farmers who are crushed by debt or by railroad fees, the president uses the power of the office to side with big business. That's really just what he did. He had pledged to only serve one term, and he did. He actually retired after one term as president. Hayes decided early on that he would not run for a second term as president. He retired from politics in 1881 at the end of his presidency, and instead he focused on causes that were of great importance to him. He fought for temperance, provided scholarships for African Americans, and even became one of Ohio State University's trustees. His wife actually died in 1889. So, he did. He only did one term. It was a very uneventful term, so to speak. And, just not a lot going on during his presidency. Hayes kind of dealt with the nature of currency while president. Because of the controversy surrounding Hayes' election, he was given the nickname his Fraudulency. He tried to get civil service reform passed, but was unsuccessful, angering members of the Republican Party in the process. He was also faced with making currency more stable in the U.S. while he was in office. Currency was backed at the time by gold, but this was scarce and many politicians felt that it should be backed by silver. Hayes did not agree with this. Hayes felt that gold was more stable. So he tried to veto the Bland-Allison Act in 1878, requiring the government to buy more silver in order to create coins. However, in 1879, the Specie Payment Resumption Act was passed that said that greenbacks, which were created after January 1st of 1879, would be backed by the gold standard. So interesting little fact there about his presidency. He also tried to deal with anti-Chinese sentiment. Hayes had to deal with the issue of Chinese immigration in the 1880s. In the West, there was a strong anti-Chinese movement, as many individuals who argued that the immigrants were taking over too many jobs. Hayes vetoed a law passed by Congress that would have severely restricted Chinese immigration. In 1880, Hayes ordered William Evarts, his Secretary of State, to meet with the Chinese and create restrictions on Chinese immigration. This was a compromise position, allowing some immigration, but still quieting those who wanted it to be stopped altogether. Very interesting thing there. Pretty crazy, to be honest. Hayes actually made, the Hayes White House made Siamese cat history. The American consul in Bangkok knew Lucy Hayes, the First Lady. He knew that Lucy Hayes loved cats and arranged in 1878 for the delivery of the first Siamese cat in America. David B. Sickles wrote to Lucy to tell her that he had read about how much she loved felines and then introduced a new pet, writing, "This pussy goes to Hong Kong, whence she will be transshipped by the Occidental and Oriental line, in charge of the purser, to San Francisco and then sent by express to Washington. The Hayeses named the cat, which arrived in 1879, Siam." Pretty interesting stuff there. Hayes eliminated booze at the White House. Although the First Lady was a lifelong, she was lifelong against alcohol. She became known as Lemonade Lucy after her death. It was actually Rutherford B. Hayes himself who initiated a ban on beer, wine, and liquor at the presidential residence. Hayes would have the occasional drink before he moved into the White House, but the ban was an attempt to curry political favor with anti-alcohol prohibitionists and maintain the dignity of the office. Even then, there were certain exceptions to the rule. The White House served wine when the adult sons of Tsar Alexander II of Russia visited, but the first couple did not drink any during that visit and that dinner. Pretty interesting. Hayes actually signed legislation allowing women to argue before the Supreme Court. In 1879, Washington, D.C. attorney Belva Lockwood lobbied Congress to be admitted to the Supreme Court's bar and argue cases. At the time, the body stated that none but men are permitted to practice before us as attorneys and counselors. But Lockwood drafted legislation that would relieve certain legal disabilities of women. The act was passed by Congress and signed by Hayes, and Lockwood was finally admitted to the Supreme Court bar on March 3rd of 1879. She actually argued Kaiser versus Stickney before the court a year later. So, that's pretty interesting about Hayes with appointing basically a first woman and allowing a first woman to be in the Supreme Court. He was a president of first, really. As a commander-in-chief at a critical period in U.S. history, Hayes saw a number of innovations come to Washington, and he participated in several firsts. Hayes was the first and only president elected by a congressional commission, and because of the disputed election results and the fact that the inauguration day fell on a Sunday, Hayes became the first president to take the oath of office at the White House, which he did privately in the Red Room on Saturday, March 3rd of 1877. And then he took a public oath 2 days later. I had already touched on that. It was a private ceremony that he was sworn in at the White House. In 1880, Hayes became the first president to visit the West Coast, writing in his diary after the 71-day trip that took him past the Rocky Mountains, "A most gratifying reception greeted us everywhere from the people and from noted and interesting individuals." Hayes also, of course, stated this earlier, he started the tradition of the Easter egg roll on the White House lawn, which has been run on the Monday after Easter since 1878. And another cool thing, Hayes was the first president to have both a telephone and a typewriter in the White House. So, really interesting. Fun facts about Hayes there. Again, not a whole lot to really report on with Hayes' presidency. So, probably the best thing to do is move on now to our kind of end, which is his death and his grave. That's, what we do here at Dead History. So let's get into that real quick. So after his presidency ended in 1881, Rutherford B. Hayes moved to Spiegel Grove, his family estate in Fremont, Ohio. He led a quiet life and dedicated much of his time to charitable organizations. Then on a chilly night in January of 1893, Hayes attended an out-of-town university trust meeting. When waiting at the train station to return to Spiegel Grove, Hayes suffered a heart attack. The hardened Civil War general decided a stiff brandy would be enough to get him home to rest and recover. Back at Spiegel Grove, his doctor placed him on bed rest, and there appeared to be an improvement before Hayes' health took a turn for the worst. By January 17th, Hayes was in critical condition. He found solace in his faith that he would soon see his beloved wife, who had died 4 years earlier. When he uttered his last words, "I know I am going where Lucy is." And that night, at 11 p.m. on January 17th of 1893, as he lay in the arms of his son, Webb, Rutherford B. Hayes died. And then, of course, there was a funeral held, procession held, and there was a first burial site. Now, he is buried at Spiegel Grove. The pictures that you're going to see on your screen are my visit there. I will tell you this. Rutherford B. Hayes, for being kind of a pretty inept, forgettable president, his gravesite I really liked. Spiegel Grove is really pretty. It's just this estate that, it's like a park. It's like a state park. It's beautifully forest and wooded. It's got these trails, and you walk this trail back to where his gravesite is, and it's surrounded by pine trees and all these. It's just really very wilderness and pretty. I really liked it. Hayes' maternal uncle, Sardis Burkhard, purchased property in Fremont, Ohio on November 5th of 1846, and it was his uncle who named the estate Spiegel Grove due to the large puddles that accumulated on the property, Spiegel being German for mirror. So that's kind of how that got its name, Spiegel Grove. Now, he was originally interred at a different cemetery, Oakwood Cemetery. I'm going to show you some pictures. Now, these pictures of the original gravesite are not my pictures. I did not visit his original gravesite. I visited where he's laid to rest now at Spiegel Grove. So the original cemetery, it was Oakwood Cemetery. It's a public cemetery. President Hayes was reinterred a new marker was erected at Oakwood that closely resembles the original tombstone, but is slightly smaller and bears the simple inscription, Hayes. The monument is surrounded by the graves of many of Hayes' family members, most with an indication of their familial association to the president, such as Rutherford P. Hayes, son of Rutherford B. Hayes. Burial of Hayes' relatives and descendants still continue to this day. Oakwood Cemetery is located on the banks of the Sandusky River in Ballville, Ohio. That's where he was originally buried. So that's where he was originally buried for, I'm not exactly sure how long it was before he was reinterred. Does it tell me here? I might get to that actually here in a second. So Hayes, as far as Spiegel Grove goes, Rutherford B. Hayes moved into the home in 1873, and he inherited Spiegel Grove when his uncle Sardis died in January of 1874. Hayes hired Foster and Company to expand the house at the end of his presidency in 1880. They nearly doubled its size, and when Hayes returned from Washington, D.C., it was to a much larger structure. Further additions were made to the back in 1889, and currently there are 31 rooms, 18 of which are bedrooms. The room to the right of the front door is where Hayes' viewing was held when he died, which was a part of the 1880 expansion. Off the porch is a casket window that opens to the floor to allow a coffin to be passed through. To the left is the parlor, and behind it is the bedroom where Hayes died. So he died here at Spiegel Grove, of course, too, as I said. And after his death, the home passed to his children. The Hayes Presidential Center beside the home was opened with a grand dedication ceremony on Memorial Day, May 30th of 1916. So pretty cool stuff. And obviously that is where he is laid to rest, here at Spiegel Grove. I don't have the exact day or date. I'm looking for it here, but I don't see it. No. Oh, here it is. There you go. I lied. 22 years later, on April 3rd of 1915, the bodies of Hayes and Lucy were reinterred to the grounds of the Spiegel Grove estate in a 12 by 12 foot granite block located on the top of a knoll to the left of the home. The tombstone was also moved to the new location, and an iron fence surrounded the grave. For years after Hayes' death, the dwindling survivors from his 23rd Regiment sent a wreath and continued the tradition at the new location. Nearby the grave is the final resting place of Hayes' beloved warhorse, Old Whitey, the steed that carried Hayes into many a Civil War battle, and the horse died on March 20th of 1879 in the middle of Hayes' presidential term. So it was actually 22 years that Hayes was buried at the original gravesite, and then he was reinterred to Spiegel Grove with his wife. So pretty interesting stuff. I'm telling you, for a man who, even though he did some really great things as far as the Civil War goes, and he was a good person, very much against slavery, very much for African Americans' rights. He was not a bad man. He just was not a good president, and his presidency was really inept and just not memorable at all. And for a man that you can say that about, his final resting place and his home there at Spiegel Grove is truly, truly beautiful. And I have to tell you, is one of my favorite presidential grave sites. It's not like my top 3 or anything, but it's definitely in the top upper echelon of grave sites that I visited, of course. So that was it. That is a look at the life, legacy, presidency, and death and burial sites of the 19th President of the United States, Rutherford B. Hayes. I hope you liked and enjoyed this look. And then, of course, next week, we're going to get into the 20th President, who is the second president ever assassinated, James Garfield. One of my favorite presidents. So that'll be a lot of fun to do. So stay tuned for that. Again, thanks for all the support. Thanks for the subscribes, the likes, the comments, questions. Leave them below. Leave your questions. Let me know what questions you have. I love it. Even if it's not related to Hayes. It could be, hey, I'm taking a trip to this state or this area. What could I see? I'd be more than happy to give you some tips. So again, thank you for everything. Thanks for the support. This is TJ with Dead History, signing off. See you next week. Bye, guys.